Well, good morning. Many years ago, I wrote the first state-by-state clinical guide requirement, as there was nothing out there that codified all of the various state regulations for clinical trials. A little bit about me. I started my career out many years ago as a pharmacist, then went on to law school and have practiced law for a little over 3 decades. And I'm currently chair of the food and drug practice at Burns and Levinson. However, next week I start with a new firm of Withers Worldwide, and I will be heading up and starting their Boston office. Withers is an international law firm with offices in every major city around the world, except in Africa. Well, we don't have an office in Africa yet. So when I attempted to look at the preview all of the state regulations, a couple of things came to mind, in that how some states were very proactive and had updated regulations. In other states, while they had regulations, they were clearly dated on their face. So after today's seminar, I hope that you will understand those areas of state-specific regulations that would affect perhaps your ongoing or planned clinical trials, that you understand risks that may occur if you're in certain jurisdictions with certain therapeutic compounds, that you can utilize the state authorities and agencies to address state-specific concerns. And like all areas of law, this is a dynamic area of law. In some states, more dynamic than others. It is constantly evolving as various events happen and state authorities seek to protect their citizens from clinical trials that perhaps aren't as properly designed or monitored as the states wish them to be. And lastly, there are strategic aspects of clinical trial site selection, and that some states clearly encourage certain research in therapeutic areas. Oncology is certainly an ongoing theme through states that try to incentivize oncology trials in their states for the benefits of their citizens. There's also other states that surprisingly sometimes have incentives for certain therapeutic classes that up until somewhat recently, drugs such as marijuana, which have been embraced now by many states, but for many years it clearly was something that was outlawed in the majority of states until Colorado several years ago opened up their state to not only medicinal use but recreational use. So we all know about the FDA requirements for running a clinical trial, that what is codified in 21 CFR, informed consent requirements in 21 CFR Part 50. And so for the most part, if you're in compliance with FDA regulations as to consenting, you are typically going to be in compliance with state regulations. There's international standards, so we won't discuss that today because the local European standards or local Asian standards are much like local state laws as opposed to FDA requirements. While there are nuances within those local international standards, for the most part, if you're running trials that are acceptable to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, you're going to pretty much comply with international standards, but for nuances that is certainly a discussion for another seminar. Interestingly, local state regulations do impact you if you're running trials in any of the 50 U.S. states. And there is nothing within the federal scheme that prevents states from enacting their own requirements. And this is where the lack of knowledge of local state regulations can affect your choices of slight selection, and also affect your choices of whether or not you want to be in that state at all. One must remember that the cornerstone or the foundation of any clinical trial and the participant of human subjects within that clinical trial is the consenting process. Certainly 21 CFR tells us the parameters around that consent and what is required. And the states add some requirements to the consenting process, but do not, in fact, tell us who has the capacity to consent, the legal age to consent, the cognitive ability to consent. All of those, the age of majority, the cognitive ability of a subject, and who, in the absence of that, be it a guardian, a substitute parent, a custodial parent, a divorced parent, a grandparent, or some sort of guardian on behalf of a minor's consent. All of that is controlled by state regulation. And not only is it controlled by state regulation, it is different in all 50 states in some regard. And so, if anything you need to take away from this talk is that once you've complied with the FDA requirements and you have a human subject that meets your inclusion protocol for your clinical trial, if it involves minors, we must know who can consent on their behalf. If it involves special populations, it will involve who can consent on their behalf. And in some states, even though there may be a guardian appointed, any person involved in experimental therapies in some states require a court order.